The dinner party was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone marking Mark's hard-earned success, yet the atmosphere bore an undercurrent of tension that couldn't be ignored. Linda had spent hours preparing, ensuring every detail, from the crystal wine glasses to the meticulously arranged centerpieces, reflected the significance of the evening. As guests arrived, laughter and the clink of glasses filled their elegant dining room. Yet Linda couldn't shake the discomfort creeping up her spine. Mark was beaming, proudly introducing Linda to colleagues and friends, his arm occasionally wrapping around her waist in a casual, yet possessive display of affection. Mr. Davidson, his boss, commanded the room with his charismatic presence. Always by Mark's side, he was the epitome of success and influence, his laughter a bit too loud, his stories a bit too grand. Linda had always admired him from a distance, respectful of the man who had given her husband so many opportunities. However, tonight, as Mr. Davidson's gaze lingered a little longer than usual, her admiration began to wane, replaced by a prickling suspicion. As the evening progressed, Linda found herself increasingly cornered by Mr. Davidson's attentions. His compliments, initially flattering, soon felt pointed and invasive. "Linda, you look absolutely ravishing tonight," he commented, his eyes scanning her a moment too long, making her shift uncomfortably under his gaze. She forced a smile, trying to brush off the comment as nothing more than polite party talk, but the way he leaned in, encroaching on her personal space as he asked about her life, her work outside of being Mark's wife, felt decidedly off. Each interaction with Mr. Davidson seemed to push a boundary, his demeanor towing the line between geniality and something more suggestive. He was subtle, skilled in the art of covert advances, his words wrapped in charm that made it difficult for Linda to pinpoint the exact moment when her discomfort shifted into silent alarm. When he lightly touched her back while laughing at a joke, or found reasons to draw her away from the group under the guise of showing her his recent vacation photos on his phone, Linda's unease grew. Mark, ever the attentive husband, seemed oblivious, his own eyes bright with ambition and perhaps too much wine. He laughed heartily at his boss's jokes, completely unaware of the undercurrents swirling between his wife and Mr. Davidson. Linda felt a pang of isolation in her husband's ignorance, a solitary sentinel aware of a threat that no one else seemed to notice. Trying to maintain her composure, Linda excused herself to refresh drinks, her hands shaking slightly as she poured wine with precision to avoid spilling. In the kitchen, the cool marble of the counter felt grounding under her palms. She took deep breaths, telling herself she was overreacting, that Mr. Davidson was just being friendly, that her suspicions were just the result of her own insecurities. Yet as she looked back into the dining room, watching Mr. Davidson charm her friends and husband alike, a cold resolve settled over her. She knew something wasn't right. The glint in his eye was not simply friendly. As the night drew to a close, guests began to leave, floating on a bubble of merriment and wine, thanking their gracious hosts for a wonderful evening. Mr. Davidson lingered, helping Mark with a few last-minute details about their deal, his voice smooth and reassuring. Linda watched them from across the room, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts about how to protect herself without causing a scene or disrupting her husband's career. When finally Mr. Davidson left, Mark wrapped his arms around Linda, full of gratitude and oblivious happiness. "He thinks the world of you," Mark said, planting a kiss on her cheek. Linda forced a smile, her heart heavy with unshared truths and a growing dread that Mr. Davidson's intentions were far from professional. As she lay in bed later that night, Mark's breathing steady and deep beside her, Linda realized she would need to confront what had happened, but how to do it without shattering her husband's trust in his mentor, or worse, implicating herself in some way. The questions loomed large in the darkness, the answers as murky as the shadows that danced across their bedroom wall. The follow-up meeting at Mr. Davidson's office was initially just another entry in Linda's calendar, a mundane corporate formality she attended out of courtesy to her husband. Mark was there to finalize the paperwork on a deal that had been months in the making, and Linda, ever the supportive spouse, was there to witness what should have been a straightforward business transaction. The office was impeccably tidy, a high-rise view that showcased the city sprawling below, a testament to Mr. Davidson's success and influence. As Mark and Mr. Davidson discussed the final details, Linda admired the cityscape, her thoughts drifting to the dinner party and the discomfort she had felt. She reminded herself to maintain a professional demeanor, attributing her previous unease to perhaps misreading social cues or Mr. Davidson's perhaps overly friendly nature. However, the dynamic shifted abruptly when Mark excused himself to take a call, leaving Linda alone with Mr. Davidson. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and Linda's earlier apprehensions resurfaced as she felt Mr. Davidson's gaze linger on her a moment too long. She tried to break the tension with small talk about the office's impressive view, but Mr. Davidson had other ideas. He approached under the guise of showing her a prized art piece on the opposite wall of the room. As they stood side by side, Mr. Davidson placed his hand on the small of her back, his touch light but deliberate. Linda tensed, her heart racing as his intentions became unmistakably clear. "You really are an astonishing woman, Linda," he murmured, his voice low, his breath a warm whisper against her ear. The comment, meant to flatter, felt like a violation, confirming Linda's worst suspicions about his behavior being far from benign. Linda stepped away quickly, her mind racing with confusion and anger. "Mr. Davidson, I appreciate your compliments, but I think it's important to keep our relationship professional," she said, her voice firm despite the shaking she felt inside. Mr. Davidson's smile faltered and he took a step back, his eyes narrowing slightly, the affable facade slipping. "I'm sure your husband wouldn't mind knowing how admired you are, Linda. It's all harmless after all," he replied, his tone light but with an edge that suggested a thinly veiled threat. The implication was clear. Her compliance was expected, her silence bought by her husband's career prospects. As Linda processed the gravity of the situation, she felt a surge of indignation. The unwelcome advance, the insinuation that her personal boundaries could be compromised for the sake of a business deal, filled her with a cold resolve. She needed to stand up for herself, yet she was acutely aware of the potential consequences her actions might have on Mark's career. When Mark returned, oblivious to the tension, he was full of enthusiasm, discussing their next steps and the bright future ahead. Linda nodded and smiled, her turmoil hidden beneath a practiced calm. The drive home was quiet on her part, her mind a whirl of conflicting loyalties, her commitment to her husband, her own sense of violated boundaries, and her fear of the repercussions that her speaking out might entail. That evening, as she lay beside Mark, his easy breathing a stark contrast to her own restless thoughts, Linda felt the weight of her dilemma. Telling Mark about the incident could mean undermining the deal he had worked so hard on, potentially devastating his trust in both his boss and his wife. Yet staying silent would mean allowing Mr. Davidson's behavior to go unchecked, compromising her own integrity and possibly setting a precedent for future misconduct. The internal conflict was agonizing. Linda knew she had to make a decision soon, but each option seemed to carry its own array of sharp consequences. The need to protect her marriage was at war with the need to protect her self-respect, leaving her caught in a moral and emotional crossfire that offered no easy answers. The coffee shop where Linda decided to confront Mr. Davidson was bustling with the usual morning rush, a cacophony of espresso machines and casual chatter, providing a stark backdrop to the tense meeting. As she saw him enter, her stomach churned, with a mixture of dread and determination. This was the moment to set things straight, to reclaim her dignity. She signaled to a quiet table in the corner, away from the overheard conversations of daily grind. As Mr. Davidson settled across from her, his usual confidence seemed to shield him from the gravity of the discussion ahead. Linda took a deep breath before speaking, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Mr. Davidson, about the other evening," she started, pausing to gauge his reaction. His expression remained unreadable, prompting her to continue. "I felt uncomfortable with the way you acted. It's important for me that our relationship remains strictly professional." Mr. Davidson's response was a mixture of surprise and dismissal, a slight smirk crossing his face as if to question her interpretation of his actions. "Linda, I think you might be reading too much into things," he said smoothly, his tone condescending. "We were just enjoying a pleasant evening. I'm sure Mark wouldn't appreciate us having any misunderstandings about such trivial matters." The word trivial hung heavily between them. Linda felt a flush of anger at his attempt to minimize his actions. "It wasn't trivial to me," she replied firmly. "And it's not about what Mark would appreciate. It's about respect and boundaries. I need you to understand that your behavior was not acceptable." Mr. Davidson leaned back, his demeanor shifting as he assessed Linda's resolve. "Linda," he began, his voice lowering to a more serious tone. "You're a smart woman. You know how important the deal is to your husband's career. It would be unfortunate if any unnecessary complications arose from a simple misunderstanding." The threat was veiled but clear, and Linda felt a cold wave of realization about the potential consequences of pushing this issue further. Mr. Davidson was not just her husband's boss. He was a man accustomed to wielding his power to maintain control. Linda's heart raced as she considered her next words carefully. Despite the fear, her voice did not waver. "This is not a misunderstanding, and I will not let it be dismissed as such," she asserted. "I am telling you that what happened made me uncomfortable, and I expect it not to happen again." Her hands were trembling slightly, but her gaze was direct, challenging him to contradict her once more. Mr. Davidson stared at her for a long moment, his initial facade of nonchalance fading into a more calculated expression. Finally, he nodded slowly, the acknowledgement coming not with an apology but a strategic retreat. "Very well, Linda. Your message is clear. It won't happen again." As they parted ways, Linda's feelings were a tangle of relief and lingering unease. She had spoken up, demanded respect, but at what cost? The veiled threat lingered in her mind, a shadow over her husband's career and their future. As she walked out of the coffee shop, the weight of the encounter settled around her, a mix of pride in her stand and fear of what might come. The confrontation had not resolved the complexity of her emotions or the situation, but had instead highlighted the delicate balance of power in her interactions with Mr. Davidson. She knew the struggle was far from over, and the road ahead would require navigating not just her relationship with her husband's boss, but also the impact on her marriage. This was just the beginning of what she knew would be a prolonged battle for respect and boundaries, one that she was now fully committed to fighting. The drive home felt colder than usual, despite the warm air blowing from the car's heater. Mark, who had always been the more silent type when deep in thought, had his focus fixed on the dark road ahead. The weight of the revelation hung heavily in the car, almost tangible in its intensity. Linda, sitting beside him, watched the familiar landmarks pass by, each one a reminder of their shared life, a life now at a crossroads. After a long silence, Linda finally spoke, her voice breaking the tension. "I know this is hard, Mark. I didn't know how to tell you. I was so afraid of how this might affect everything you've worked for." Her words, heavy with regret and fear, filled the car. She kept her gaze directed out the window, afraid to see the impact of her words on Mark. Mark let out a deep sigh, one that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 worries. He glanced at Linda briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Why didn't you tell me right after the dinner?" His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of hurt. "Did you think I wouldn't believe you, or were you worried about the deal?" Linda turned to face him, her eyes searching his profile for signs of understanding. "It wasn't that simple. I was confused, shocked. I didn't want to believe it myself," she confessed. "And yes, I was worried about your deal. I didn't want to be the reason it fell apart." Mark's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. "Linda, nothing, no deal, no job, is more important than you. I wish you'd trusted me to handle it sooner." The disappointment in his voice was palpable, and it stung Linda more deeply than she had anticipated. As they pulled into the driveway of their home, the silence between them felt more profound. Once inside, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, a space that had hosted countless late-night conversations and morning coffees. Now, it served as the setting for perhaps the most crucial discussion of their marriage. Mark was the first to break the silence. "What do you want to do about this?" His question was straightforward, but the implications were enormous. It wasn't just about deciding whether to confront Mr. Davidson or involve HR. It was about determining the direction of their relationship and their lives. Linda took a moment before responding, her thoughts racing. "I want to stand up to him," she stated firmly. "If I don't, who knows who else he might do this to. But I want us to think about this together. Whatever we decide, it has to be a decision we both can live with." Mark nodded, his expression one of resolve mixed with concern. "Okay, let's think this through. If we go to HR, there's going to be fallout. I might even lose my job. Are we prepared for that? Or would it be better if I start looking for another job first, somewhere away from him?" Linda reached for his hand, a gesture of solidarity. "I think we should start looking for other job options for you," she suggested. "Something that doesn't tie us to him or the company. Maybe this is a chance to find something better, something that doesn't compromise our values." Mark squeezed her hand in agreement. "And I'll support whatever action you want to take against him," he added. "No one has the right to make you feel unsafe or disrespected. We'll do this together." Their conversation continued into the night, weighing every potential consequence and planning their next steps carefully. It was a testament to their partnership, a bond strengthened by facing adversity together rather than letting it drive them apart. They were in uncharted waters, but they were navigating them as a united front, committed to supporting each other and emerging stronger on the other side. As they walked into the HR department together, the decision felt like the culmination of countless conversations and shared uncertainties. Mark was resolute, his usual reserve replaced by a firm determination to stand beside Linda, to be part of the change they both hoped to see. They had prepared for this moment meticulously, gathering their thoughts and evidence, ready to lay bare a truth that had disrupted their lives and tested the foundations of their marriage. Sitting across from the HR manager, they presented their case with a calm clarity. Linda recounted her experiences, her voice steady but charged with an undeniable emotion. She spoke of the discomfort, the inappropriate advances, and the subtle threats veiled as jokes. Mark added his observations, his perspective reinforcing Linda's claims and highlighting the impact the ordeal had on their personal and professional lives. Their testimony was a powerful alliance of personal integrity and mutual support. The HR manager listened intently, taking notes, nodding with an understanding that conveyed both sympathy and professionalism. There was a promise of a thorough investigation, a commitment to fairness and respect for all parties involved. The company's stance on maintaining a safe and respectful workplace was reiterated, providing a sliver of hope that justice might indeed prevail. The weeks following their meeting were a period of tense anticipation. Mark's position within the company felt precarious, the atmosphere around him charged with unspoken questions and speculative glances. Yet despite the professional uncertainty, his resolve did not waver. Linda's strength became his anchor, and together, they navigated the daily challenges with a renewed sense of purpose. When the investigation concluded, it brought a mixture of relief and validation. The HR department had taken their claims seriously, substantiating the complaints with further evidence from other unnoticed incidents. Mr. Davidson faced disciplinary actions, including suspension and mandatory training. It was a clear message from the company. Unethical behavior, no matter the rank of the individual involved, would not be tolerated. The resolution of the case brought a profound sense of closure to Linda and Mark. It was a vindication of Linda's bravery to speak out and Mark's courage to support her against formidable odds. Their journey through this difficult episode had revealed the depth of their commitment to each other and to their shared values. In the aftermath, Linda and Mark focused on rebuilding their lives. They spent evenings discussing their future, redefining what success and happiness meant to them both individually and as couple. The ordeal had shifted their perspectives, prioritizing personal fulfillment and ethical integrity over external achievements. They began setting new boundaries, both at home and at work, ensuring that their environments fostered respect and positivity. Mark eventually decided to seek new professional opportunities, motivated by a desire to work in an environment that aligned more closely with his values. Linda, feeling empowered by the support she had received, became more involved in advocacy for workplace rights, sharing her story to encourage others facing similar challenges. Their relationship, tested by adversity, emerged stronger. The trust they rebuilt was deeper, founded on an unshakable respect for each other's strength and vulnerabilities. They learned to communicate more openly, to share their fears and hopes without reservation, and to support each other unconditionally. As they moved forward, the lessons learned from their experiences remained a guiding light. They understood that life could be unpredictable and challenging, but facing those challenges together, with honesty and integrity, made them surmountable. Linda and Mark had not only survived their ordeal, but had used it as a catalyst for growth and renewal, setting a new course towards a future that promised not just success, but genuine fulfillment and mutual respect.